What is up, fight fans? Welcome to the MMA Plug presented to you by Mile High Sports. I'm your host, Jordan Kurtz. You can give me a follow along online at Comments from the Peanut Gallery. We've got a big show in store for you folks today, covering a multitude of topics here in mixed martial arts and the combat sports world as a whole. But first off, I want to give a shout out to the Mile High Sports crew here. They are doing tremendous things across the core four in sports right now. We have college basketball in full swing. We have winter sports with the NBA, the NHL, and then obviously just had championship weekend for the NFL as far as the conference play goes. Big game weekend in a couple of weeks, so it's going to be a whole bunch of hoopla for Kansas City and Philadelphia's rematch. You just have to feel for the Buffalo Bills, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, it's pretty hard to beat the Chiefs in general as the two-time defending champions. It's even harder to beat the Chiefs and the refs. It's so much harder for the NFL to defend the integrity of the shield in the game after some of those calls in each of those games with the Chiefs. I mean, again, I'm not out here screaming a conspiracy for those games or anything, but there's some of those skeptical hippo eyes type of calls where you just wonder what the fix is as far as with the NFL right now. But all of that aside, just want to give a shout out again to the Mile High Sports crew here. Make sure that you check them out across all platforms. Smash that like, share, and subscribe button wherever possible, wherever that be, whether that's the socials, YouTube. Check out the website, milehighsports.com, the podcast side of things, and the magazine and merch drops as well. Transitioning now to the Colorado slate, we've got a few shows coming up here on the Front Range in the next few weeks. As much as you possibly can, please buy your tickets directly from the fighters, or if you are purchasing a stream to be able to watch that live, can't go and attend in person, there is going to be options to be able to credit the athlete that you're watching in support of as well. And if you don't know anyone, choose someone, enter somebody in that. It's going to benefit them on the commission side of things for these amateurs. That's the only way that they're able to get paid for their efforts. It goes a great deal toward them growing their platform, and it also helps them cover their camp expenses for going into that competition. In a couple of weeks, we have Colorado Jiu-Jitsu Club 24 at the Stampede. That is February 8th, going to be cracking the doors open at noon. There is a massive main event that we are about to announce. I'm sure, depending on if you're listening to this now, I'm not sure if it's been posted yet on the CJJC page or not, but there's a couple of things that have been being finalized today. Again, a couple of very, very big matchups and names that you'll recognize in those main and co-main event slots. So we are looking forward to putting that show and getting those announcements out to you shortly for that show. Come check us out on February 8th at the Stampede. Following that, there is going to be Colorado Combat Club happening on March 1st. That is also at the Stampede. We've got 5 pro fights on the card. Media day over the weekend. Had a few of the fighters in, capturing some content and just some promotional material for the card that's going to be coming up. Cannot wait for that show. It's been a long-awaited return for Triple C to get back into the action here. Again, that's going to be at the Stampede. Matinee card. Come check us out, and then you'll be out in time to be able to have the rest of your evening there for you. Also on that same day, and if you're feeling froggy enough to go check out another card, down in the Springs at the Colorado Springs City Hub, you have Battle MMA Championships. That, again, there's going to be a multitude of fighters from all of these camps up and down the Front Range that'll be showcased on that card as well. A variety of pro fights in the mix there. So make sure that if you're in Southern Colorado and you have the chance to check out some of those fights live in person, you do so there. Sparta's also going to be having a show happening in March, that Army versus Marine show. So give them a look as well in the process. Now, as we switch things up, we're going to get to the weekend recap. This weekend recap is brought to you by QNP Co. We are looking at the PFL Road to Dubai Championship Series Fight Night, and really we're only going to talk about the main event fight there. I think that this fight quite possibly was the best title fight in PFL history, or I won't say in Bellator history because there's way too much of a rich history from some of those old matchups, especially within the lightweight division alone, albeit arguably one of the, I mean, most people would probably put it in their top 10 all time of Michael Chandler and Eddie Alvarez back in the day. But this was a back and forth affair, majority decision win by Usman Nurmagomedov. He continues to keep that unblemished record, I should say, intact with that victory. Paul Hughes, though, he represented himself very, very well. I mean, I'm not going to say robbery because robbery is not a term that is applicable, nor does it fit in this situation. And I've said it many a times, and I will hold true to the sentiment on this program right now. Robbery should be something that is very seldomly used for a very blatant case. This was a very, very close fight. And in certain sequences, you could make a splitting hairs case in either direction. There were folks out there who believed that Paul Hughes potentially won that contest and think that, hey, that's a hidden gem in the waiting for maybe the UFC to figure out how to come and swoop up. He comes out looking like a winner and his stock rises, although he lost that fight. For those who didn't watch it, maybe you can draw the parallel of just a couple of months ago, or I should say rather about, 6 weeks ago, whatever it was, for the final pay-per-view card for the UFC in 2024, where we saw Ian Machado Gary take on Shavkat Rakhmonov. Shavkat being the undefeated, menacing prospect with all finishes, taking on Ian Gary as the underdog, who Ian Gary did lose that fight. He did lose the decision. However, by the way that he fought, the grit that he showed, the resiliency, and the ability to push his opponent all the way to the gritty end, their stock rose immensely. So again, I understand. A lot of you probably did not check out this fight card this weekend for the PFL. It was at an off time because of the time difference, being that it was over there in Dubai. Not a high viewership rate for PFL in general. Most people are capturing the action or checking out highlights and clips once the results are already in place. So I just will offer you that. If you want to go back and check out that fight, that's kind of what I will give you a recent comparison of. Was a very back and forth fight that each guy had their moment. And it was Usman who just happened to have a little bit more when it came to the judges' scorecards. What do you guys think? Did you think that the Irishman was able to pull it off? Did you think that the decision was right and Usman's record stays intact? I think that this was a tremendous test for Usman, and I think that this was obviously the closest that he's ever been pushed within a fight. Is he ready to make that crossover to the UFC based on that performance? And what would you see his trajectory based on that? Do you think that he should stay where he's at and build up his brand, his money as much as possible there and take that immediate rematch? What do you think? What are your thoughts? Let us know. Hit me up on social media. That's Jordan Kurtz at Comments from the Peanut Gallery on Instagram or on Threads, Peanut Podcast on Twitter. Please let me know, or X, I should say. I mean, I don't know how long it's going to go. I'm still going to call it Twitter. Just is what it is. But we're going to transition now to the UFC's Fight Night card. They are over there in Riyadh, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. There is a couple of ranked matchups on the card. Definitely a plethora of recognizable names and exciting matchups that we're going to go through here. From the top of the bill, you have middleweights. You have the number 2 ranked former champion and one of the all-time greats of the division, Israel, the last style bender, Adesanya, coming into the contest against the number 5 ranked rising contender, the silent assassin, Nasruddin Imavov. And I feel like Nasruddin has just continued to win against quality opponent, quality opponent time after time. He's not really a vocal guy. I mean, he's a Dagestani by way of France out of Fight Factory. But for Coach Furnon, that's another top contender who's in the mix for him. I think that he has the grappling and the wrestling to potentially neutralize Israel Adesanya in this matchup. But then again, if we see a vintage Izzy, I don't know that Nasruddin has the aura, if you will. It depends on if we get the moxie, the whatever the presence it is that, throughout his top run that Izzy carried about him, that air of invincibility, if you will. He's a tough out for anybody because he is one of the most prolific strikers in the history of the sport. He does have good takedown defense because he is so long and lanky. He's able to utilize his hips, but once he does get taken down, somebody who has the grappling like Nasruddin does have the potential of holding him there and neutralizing him, or keeping him bodied up against the fence for a little bit longer than he would potentially want to be. Now that Izzy is a little bit older, a couple of fights removed from that dominant championship run, has the cold winter wisps of father time started to creep in for the last style bender. I think that this is going to be a big test to see where he's at. And it's also going to be a very big indicator of just how far progressed Imavov is in the process. I'm torn. I would like to give you a completely objective analysis or an objective lean on this one and say that it's Izzy, but there's just something about it right now. It seems like he's back all in. It seems like he's motivated. It seems like he wants to be back in the thick of things. But that's all hard to tell. He's made so much money at this stage. He has gotten older. He has gone through the lumps and the injuries. Where is he? I think that that's what we need to see on Saturday. And on the flip side, Imavov hasn't experienced any of those riches. He hasn't experienced any of those heights that Izzy has. He is still hungry. He is still the hunter who is eager to be able to put that mount on his wall, if you will, of the former champion in Israel Adesanya. Either way, I'm leaning Izzy on this one. All facts, or I should say all feelings, no facts in that. I have a hard time going against Adesanya in this matchup. Following that, though, in the co-main event, we have a matchup that really, this one, I feel like the fans win. You have Michael Venom Page coming up from welterweight. This is the second time in his entire pro career that he's fought all the way up at middleweight. He's had a ton of catch weights where he's fought in the mid 170s throughout his career. But again, this is only the second time all the way up at 185. He's taken on Shara Bullet Magomedov, the number 14 ranked middleweight. Shara comes into the fight, unblemished 15-0 record. Last fall, he had the incredible viral knockout, the double back fist. The Pirate, he's an exciting fighter. I think that at times he throws caution to the wind and is a little bit reckless. He's a hard recipe to figure out if you don't have the grappling in your back pocket, I feel like. We saw a couple of guys who just had a small amount of and again, they didn't beat him, but I feel like, exposed potential opportunities against Shara Bullet. He does have some of the most entertaining knockouts throughout his resume, whether it be MMA to other striking disciplines, boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, whatever it may be. But he's also taken on MVP Michael Venom Page, who he is a walking highlight reel. Michael Venom Page is another fighter who has an absolutely difficult style to prepare for. There is nobody else like him. He's a father to his own style. He is so long as a welterweight that, I think it's going to be a little bit more of an evened up gap as far as the length situation at middleweight. But he is so fast with his entries. He has that split side staggered stance, traditional martial arts background. He wants to be very kick heavy. He's going to be in and out, darting with his jab. It's a guy who I don't know that there's anybody else in the UFC that covers distance the way that he does. When he is standing at range, I mean, you think that you're at worst, you're at long range tactics to be able to be hit. But then the next thing you know, he's closed that gap and you're getting hit with punches and he's right there. And then before you know it, and before you can counter and react, he is right back out. And against good strikers like Kevin Holland, since he's been in the UFC, that was always the question of MVP before he transitioned from Bellator. How would he do against these top guys in the UFC? Well, he fought guys like Kevin Holland, answered that test, and kind of dominated that fight in the process. So I am looking forward to this Strikers Delight matchup. This is two very different styles. You're seeing a little bit more of an in and out side stance point fighter versus a Muay Thai brawler. One way or the other, I think that this fight has the potential to be the fight of the night with highlights coming from it in multiple exchanges throughout this contest. In the feature fight, we have a ranked matchup in the heavyweight division. You have number 4, Sergey Pavlovich, making his return against Biggie Boy, number 9, Jairzinho Rosenstrike. Two heavyweights who have heavy hands and like to throw big bombs. Pavlovich has had some unfortunate trips to the octagon since he was that juggernaut who was thought to be the next heavyweight champion. And, it's understandable that, you go from being seemingly invincible to you get knocked out in the title fight against Tom Aspinall. And then you go through some questions. You wonder about things. You then have to get back in the mix in that heavyweight division against guys who on any given strike have the ability to shut your lights out. Jairzinho Rosenstrike has been a guy who he's had the same sort of up and down run as a heavyweight. He's been on the positive side of some absolutely spectacular highlight reel finishes and knockouts, especially, the fight against Alistair Overeem. He's the type of fighter who has that explosive level of power that he could be down. In this instance, this being a 15-minute fight, he could be down 14 minutes and 55 seconds. He needs one punch to be able to seal the deal, and that's exactly what he did against Alistair Overeem. He was losing that fight, ends up TKOing Alistair with that final punch at the very end of the fight. Drops Alistair, splits his lip wide open. It's one of those things that each of these guys has the ability to just put your absolute lights out. If you've ever seen videos of Pavlovich with his boxing and how fast his hands are, a man who is 260 pounds, who can move his hands and his feet that quickly, that is a menacing threat in the cage when you are swinging 4-ounce gloves. Rosenstrike, on the flip side, had upwards of 90-plus kickboxing fights prior to ever getting into the UFC, was a multiple-time champion in that process. So both of these guys, decorated strikers, want to go out there and shut the lights out on the feet. I'm interested to see how this matchup plays out. I don't think that this ends up being a belly-bumping matchup. I've said it many a times that when you usually in the heavyweight division, you have guys who are explosive strikers, it's either going to go one of two ways. You're going to see a finish fairly early and somebody's going to have their lights put out, or it's going to be some titty bumping for 15 minutes. I don't think that it's going to be the latter. I hope that it's the former for all of us who are watching. You have Said Nurmagomedov making his return in a matchup with a very exciting bantamweight prospect who has had some highlight reel finishes across his UFC run so far, and Vinicius Oliveira. You also have the Denver product, Mohammad Naimov taking on Khan Alfi. That rounds off the main card. Now, to hit on a few matchups here on the prelims that I think are worth keeping your eyes on, I think that the main event of the prelims, that's a fight that you have the opportunity to see a couple of guys who like to keep it standing and are going to want to put on a performance for the fans. You have Mike Davis at 11-2 taking on the Frenchman in Farazim. Farazim, a little bit more of that French kickboxing style, long, lanky, and wants to play it out with the point style, but also from the clinch has some very devastating knees in the process, has produced finishes there. Has a couple of big wins across his UFC run, has fought some very high-profile guys too in the process. You have a matchup where I think that we could see an upset here. Shamil Gaziev was very highly touted coming off of the Contender Series. Gets inserted very early on into a main event on a fight night and doesn't go his way. Basically, saw him break in the cage in the process. Just didn't look equipped with the tools to be thrust into the spotlight or into that high of a caliber of a matchup that soon. He does still hold the number 14 ranking at his 13-1 post. I think that still kind of speaks to what we've said on a variety of occasions too, just how down the heavyweight division is as a whole. But he's taken on former LFA champion in Thomas Peterson. Thomas Peterson comes into the fight at 9-2. Peterson can wrestle. Peterson has heavy hands. I think that he has the ability to also put the pace on Gaziev to produce a similar effect in just breaking him, make him get exhausted, put a body up against him on the fence, make him carry your weight. And I think that those are all routes to victory for Thomas Peterson. Following that, a guy who's had some ups and downs in his run, but when he's on, he is a finishing machine who every single time when he is on and wins, you see him in the bonus candidate selection and highlight real performances. You have Terrence T-Rex McKinney. He's taken on Damir Hadzovic. Very dangerous matchup for Terrence. However, Terrence has the ability to put anybody out with any strike at any time, as we've seen. I mean, he has one of the fastest knockouts in UFC history. I do believe that it still right now at this moment stands as the fastest knockout in UFC lightweight history, when he knocked out Matt Frevola in his UFC debut. I hope that this is an opportunity for Terrence to, to get a win and start keeping some traction in the right direction, because he really is an exciting fighter. And he has a wild backstory that, I think has helped propel him into the fame or the recognition that he has. But in order to keep that train rolling and to keep things moving forward with you in the dance, if you will, you have to win. You have to keep on winning. And more than just the winning side of things, my concern ultimately still, and I said it after his last loss, and I'll say it again. When Terrence gets knocked out, he doesn't just get knocked out. Or I should say, when Terrence loses, he doesn't just get knocked out. He gets knocked the F out. The last fight that he had, that one, I mean, I believe that he's coming back too soon, if we're being completely honest. If you want me to be 100% objective here, and if you were to ask me from a smart perspective, if you're shopping lines out there, I think that this is still too soon. The last knockout that he had, and especially from a couple of the sports docs who weighed in with their analysis to it, from the kind of fencing reaction that he had and the movement that was going on in his face from the impact of the blunt force of that knockout blow from the finish that he took. That was a bad one. And he's had a few now over the course of his career. How many knockouts of that devastating sort of fashion should we see before we start really kind of putting some alternatives on the table here for a path in life for Terrence. You know, again, I hate to be the one to tell somebody to change their livelihood or to do any of that, but it is just a general concern knowing what we know and with the data being there that he's got the light shut out pretty bad a few times. And that being said, it's that much easier to happen when it's happened before. Hopefully this goes out, and Terrence is just able to walk away from this healthily, win or loss, keeping this objective as far as the analysis goes. Talking a couple of other fights here before we round off and head to a new segment on the program. We have a matchup that you see the flyweight entrance for a former women's title challenger in Mayra Bueno Silva. She is taking on Jasmine Jasudavicius. Jasmine Jasudavicius is holding on to that number 12 ranked spot in the women's flyweight division, fresh off of a few wins, one of those being here in Denver just this last summer over Fatima Klein. I think that this is definitely a tough fight for Jasmine. Jasmine is a very physically capable and a hardy. She's not the biggest flyweight in the world, but she's very physically capable. You know, she can hold her ground. But you have someone coming down from bantamweight, you can almost be certain that that size advantage is going to be going by Shitara. You know, Shitara, she has a lot of tenacity to her game, but there's also going to be a lot of fundamental flaws because she gets so aggressive or she's so willing to empty the tank in certain exchanges that from the data that we've seen, she leaves herself exhausted to the point to where her fundamentals suffer the later that the fight creeps on. This now going back to being a 15-minute fight as opposed to when we've seen her in 25-minute fights, you know, who knows how that plays a factor in terms of the fatigue or how she's approaching this. How does the weight cut impact her conditioning or her fatigue levels in the process and her ability to recover throughout some of those bursts and sprints and scrambles that she likes to take? That's all the things that we're going to have to look at as this matchup continues to play out. We're going to transition now to a different topic, and this is still within the combat sports world, and there's some MMA ties, but it is bare knuckle boxing. This was kind of the belle of the ball last week because, again, the PFL show, I just don't think that there was that much of a take rate or that many people who watched it. I think the bigger focus was on KnuckleMania 5 that was out there in Philadelphia. KnuckleMania 5 was a sold-out show at the Wells Fargo Arena in Philadelphia. You know, this was the biggest attendance in that venue for a combat sports event ever. They did more than 17,000 in attendance. If we're being honest, and I will offer you that Philadelphia it's a fight town. It's a very rich history with its fighting. I mean, kind of weird that they recognize Rocky, a fictional fighter, when they have actual real very high level world champion fighters that come out of Philly. You know, you have Joe Louis to Bernard Hopkins to, you know, a variety. Again, a lot of actual champion fighters from Philly, but I digress. A fight town, if you will. Outside of the UFC and a few select boxing events, no one else right now, no other promotion or outfit in the States is doing that type of fanfare. And I say this from the vantage point of being someone who has been boots on the ground and who has covered one championship here in the States, who has covered PFL, Bellator back when it was in existence. $17K for what BKFC did there. PFL would be lucky to do $7K, and they gave away 6,000 of the tickets. I've been in venues for PFL shows where they should have had a massive draw or should have absolutely sold out an 1,100 capacity venue, and there were entire rows that were empty. But back here to what they were able to accomplish and why I think they were able to do so well with BKFC. They did it in such a great fashion. They built the card around arguably the biggest active star or recognized fighter from the city of Philadelphia. They had the Underground King himself, aka the former Bellator and UFC champion, guy who cashed out also and made 8 figures worth of money in one championship in his free agency deal there. Eddie Alvarez. He was the A side of the main event in this fight, taking on Lil Heathen Jeremy Stevens. Now, this fight didn't go Eddie's way, obviously. He got his jaw broken by Jeremy Stevens. Jeremy Stevens is not the former champion with the stature in terms of his fight credentials, resume, whatever you want to coin it, to his public profile, net worth, anything along those lines. But Jeremy Stevens still is a very high profile name who presents a killer be killed style that sees him either go out on his shield or come home carrying it. His record reflects that. He's got a lot of 50-50 type of matchups, and record reflects that as such. When you add those two guys from the main event, and then you couple that with part owner of the Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship, notorious Conor McGregor, being there, he has history with each of these guys. And this was acknowledged in the buildup, in the face-offs, the pressers the days before, as well as night of in the process. For those who are just tuning in and aren't aware, Conor McGregor defeated Eddie Alvarez for the UFC Lightweight Championship back in 2016, Madison Square Garden. Arguably one of the greatest championship performances ever in UFC history. Objectively speaking, that can be researched by anybody, or that's on the god tier performances of championship fights on any list that you look. That's not just glazing Conor, not at all. Then on the flip side, the history with Jeremy Stevens, you may not necessarily have recognized him then or remember at the time, but I know that you have all heard the who the foo is that guy? That was Jeremy Stevens. Jeremy Stevens was saying, me, I'm the hardest hitting 145er right here. He TKOs people. When I knock him out, they don't move. That was Jeremy Stevens. He was of that exchange there. After Jeremy Stevens wins that fight, he's in the circle, obviously. Then Conor McGregor's there. They have themselves a little face-off. Conor just got shut down for the rumored Logan Paul bout from the UFC, which I told you would happen. The UFC, there was no way that logistically or contractually they would allow for that fight to actually go through, or the glorified spar, as Conor called it. There was no way that they would have allowed for that to be the case. However, Conor, then again, he's in here with BKFC and saying that, oh, you may just someday hear my music and see me walking out to the circle with my wrists wrapped for a bare knuckle fight. Well, Conor, that's a breach of contract. You can't do that. Like, it's just, I mean, the moves conflict, but as far as for the masses and for the entertainment, they move the needle. Even amidst all of the controversy, Conor still somehow is the buzz of everything that he does. But I will also say that it was kind of sad with some of his time on the mic this week. I mean, it's just further and further down this slippery slope of the addiction and the demons that he's fighting. But we had Conor start to try to give this almost like Braveheart, war type speech in the lead-ins to the fight the days before. But then we saw him almost kind of slip up on his words, and then he's looking down at a cue card. This is almost like that time in the WWE back in the day when you saw The Rock come back for a small amount of time frame, and John Cena called him out right there on the spot for having to look at the promos that he had written down on his wrist. You're talking about someone who was once one of the greatest off-the-top wordsmiths and smack talkers, fight sellers, promoters, all of the descriptors there, to resorting to being winded after a couple of sentences and having to resort to look down at cue cards. It's just such a far fall from grace that it's wild to see. But back to what BKFC did well, they had a heavyweight bomber who isn't afraid to let loose on the mic and to talk his smack, to cut his promos, and to call his shots, like Big Ben Rothwell, who delivered a knockout in his co-main event heavyweight title fight. The King of Kenosha, him and Mark Hunt had some words back and forth and seemingly have agreed to get in there in the circle and get after it. I'd love to see that fight. I mean, you have Mark Hunt, one of the most sensational heavyweight knockout artists of our era, whether it was K1 kickboxing back in the day, to his time spent in Pride, to then his run in the UFC with all of his walk-off knockouts. Then you have, again, Ben Rothwell is kind of the king of the heavyweight division right now for the BKFC. I'd love to see that matchup. And in typical BKFC fashion, it ain't KnuckleMania if they're not a little TNA, baby. You had Rowdy Beck Rollins, who defeated Killer B Taylor Starling. They both dressed to impress at the weigh-ins. You had Starling with an Eagles string bikini. NSFW, for those of you at work, don't pull that up. But just based off of the weigh-in photos alone and those two and who they are, just for information's sake, to know the metrics, I'd like to know what the uptick in their OnlyFans subscriptions were following the fight and weigh-ins. Danny, it's got to be, they had to have made a nice little extra stipend on top of their fight purses for this fight based on all that. You also had Big Pat Brady on the card, along with a bunch of cannoli-eating Philly Guidos. No, literally. John Gabarino brought a box of cannolis to the face-offs. Now, his opponent slapped him out of his hands, and then his opponent, in turn, got virally knocked out. That was the big overhand that you saw over the weekend from the card. But again, entertainment played right up to that Philly market. Circling back, I don't know that there is another show here stateside outside of the UFC and a couple of select boxing promotions that would be able to have that level of fanfare, that type of attendance, that buy rate for the pay-per-view, and just the overall attraction that they had. PFL wouldn't have even filled up the lower bowl. One championship would have struggled with, especially now that they don't have major stateside stars after Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson retired. Bellator, dead. BYB, they do a tremendous job and they put on fantastic shows, but with all due respect, with their roster right now today, I don't think that they could go out and sell out the Wells Fargo Center. $17K is a lot of tickets to be able to move. It's not a knock. It's more of just a, wow, BKFC really just did that. That's a real big boy move in a big boy market. It was KnuckleMania, but the hype, the fanfare, the personalities, and the masses made it feel more like WrestleMania. And I think that this was a massive win all across the board for BKFC. They have that huge multi-million-dollar tournament that they have going down this year. So I think that it was just a tremendous platform for them to go out there and slingshot themselves forward and really kind of separate themselves from the pack in that particular space. Now, talking about the GFL, let's run through this real quick before we hit 3 rounds and get out of here for the day, ladies and gentlemen. The GFL is already a disaster. They spent some money on that draft stream too. It was about 3 hours of a live stream. In all reality, it could have probably been 45 minutes or less. And when I say that they spent some money, let me tell you exactly in that. They had a studio set with personalities such as Mike Goldberg, Robin Black, Brendan Schaub, and more on the panel itself. This definitely wasn't free, just for the studio setup alone. And say what you want about Papa, but he doesn't come without a cheap price tag, or he doesn't come with a cheap price tag. He's going to get his quote. And then to get Goldie as well as Robin Black, no, you're definitely shelling out some bread for this. But what I don't understand is you went through the effort and the lengths and spent the resources on those guys, but you completely screwed the pooch with some of the other measures that you took. I mean, you went so far as to have other high-profile figures, Sage Northcutt, some others, join on the live stream. I know that those weren't all just pro bono appearances. Let's talk about, within the draft itself. The draft saw former UFC champion Tyron Woodley drafted as the #1 pick. You heard that right. T Wood, #1 pick, GFL. Should probably give you an indication of what this operation is as a whole. Just as soon as Chris Weidman announced his retirement, we talked about it last week on the program, he threw his name back in the hat for GFL, citing his history with guys like Luke Rockhold and Gegard Mousasi as reasons for him to potentially want to keep going if those fights were to come up. But this is where things get tricky. Also drafted was former UFC light heavyweight champion Sugar Rashad Evans. Rashad immediately came out and posted that said that this was done without his consent. He did not agree to be a part of this. So what's really going on here? You couple all of those shenanigans and tomfoolery with the AI music and the AI graphics that were so god-awful and cringy that it begs the question of how or if any of this is actually legitimate, and will there ever be a GFL event that actually goes down? I mean, just go look it up. Go look up how cringy and how terrible that AI was. Look at what they did to Verdum's face. Look at Alexander Gustafsson. Like, it is horrible. This was quite possibly one of the, like, if you would have just said, you know what, just type in the basic rundown, hey, ChatGPT, give me some sort of weird, like, fantasy-infused MMA draft that loosely adapts people's faces. Well, in the day and age where we have graphics and CGI that produces near lifelike images, you got to think this was like PS2 level graphics for their faces. So just, again, make of that what you will. But GFL, in my opinion, is already a disaster. Now let's transition to 3 rounds and we'll be out of here for the week. My man, Danny Bailey behind the boards. What do we have, my friend?
Islam Makhachev and Dricus du Plessis go back and forth, with Islam saying he could go up to 185 and challenge for that second belt. What do you think here?
Islam, I think that if he doesn't get the right particular matchup that he wants at 55, he's already said he wants to have a second belt. He believes that that is what will cement his legacy, and that's what he needs to do before he rides off into the sunset and goes back and hangs out on his land in Dagestan. One of those being Justin Gaethje. He said that he wants that Gaethje fight if Gaethje has an impressive win over Dan Hooker, simply because it's somebody who he hasn't fought. But that's a lot of things that are contingent upon that fight going in that favor and that win, especially with Arman and Oliveira still out there. But he says that those guys that he's already fought, those rematches, those aren't really something that excites him. And I already spoke to that last week with the rematch effect. He's already beat all of these guys in impressive fashion. So him talking about going all the way up to middleweight, jumping past welterweight, well, that's because his teammate and newer training partner in Bilal Muhammad is the current 170-pound champion. Should Bilal stay champion after his next fight, then I would imagine that, yeah, Islam, if he really wants to go up for a second belt, he's going to have to make that jump. However, Dricus, in response, says he's a big lightweight, and I will offer him that. And he's a very talented fighter, but I'm a big middleweight. He may train with middleweights in the gym, but there's only one world champion, and that's me. I like that response from the champion. I would hope that he has a great sense of confidence about himself and that he wouldn't be fearful of a guy 2 weight classes, 30 pounds down coming up and challenging him.
Former Bellator light heavyweight champion Vadim Nemkov has revealed his fight last Saturday at the PFL Road to Dubai Championship Series was the final fight on his deal. At 32, will he cross over to the UFC?
I think that he is a strong contender to be able to cross over into the UFC. You know, he's fought in the PFL Tour side of things at both heavyweight and light heavyweight. As mentioned, was the former light heavyweight champion, has multiple wins over Corey Anderson. You know, all of that being said, he is under Fyodor's banner, and we know that there is not a great history or a positive relationship with Fedor and Dana in the UFC. A lot of Fedor's camp has stayed with that Bellator side or stayed more on the Russian bloc type promotions, the ACBs of the world, ACAs and whatnot. He is certainly of the caliber to go over and be someone who can win fights and be in the mix. At 32, are they interested? I'm not sure. Doesn't bring a whole lot of marketing to the table.
Neil Dariush made headlines in a recent interview by saying that he believes that Max Holloway would be the best bet to take Islam Makhachev's crown at 155. Is he on to something?
On to something? No. On something? Yes. Benil, brother, come on, brother. I get what you're saying as far as the pace goes, but Islam, he's different. And as much as I love Max Holloway, I mean, I would love to say no matter what in any given contest, blessed is best, the blessed express, we are all the way with Max. However, we have to recognize this for what it is. Max Holloway, I believe, would have a very, very tough test going up to 155 pounds and having to deal with the suffocating grappling that Islam Makhachev would be able to put in. Yes, Max is a guy who we have never, outside of his early stages of his UFC run, in these latter years, we haven't seen Max get wrestle left at all. We haven't seen anybody just basically smother him and lay and pray and neutralize him, or outside of the finish, the heartbreaking finish against Ilia Topuria, we haven't seen anybody put Max out. So I understand where he speaks of this, in relation to the BMF and him having that win over Justin Gaethje last spring at UFC 300. However, that was in large. That was a 4-ounce kickboxing matchup with Justin Gaethje and Max Holloway. Islam Makhachev would not take that same approach. Islam would do absolutely everything possible to get that fight up against the fence or then down to the canvas. Islam's trip game, his takedowns, all of that are some of the most elite that we have seen in the lightweight division. And I just feel like that is too tall of a task for Max Holloway to come up and usurp the sitting champion. So again, I say, onto something? No. On something? Oh yeah. But just like that, folks, we are all out of time. We want to thank you all so much for tuning in with us each and every week for this original combat sports programming. Let me know what you think. Hit us up on social media. If you have any tips, any lines, any bunches that you're putting together out there as you're shopping the books and you want the people to know about, let us know. We'll be happy to share that out for you. I'm Jordan Kurtz. Want to give a big thank you to my man, Danny Bailey, behind the boards. Shout out to the Mile High Sports crew. Give me a follow at Comments from the Peanut Gallery. Smash that like, share, and subscribe wherever possible. This is the MMA plug on Mile High Sports.